This is Alistair Vance, a 35-year-old billionaire real estate shark known for his ruthless, all-or-nothing tactics. He's standing in my living room today not as a guest, but as the man ready to strip my family's legacy away. He has no idea that I'm the only one standing between him and the keys to this manor. My parents lured me back from Chicago under the guise of a charity gala, but the second I stepped into the main hall of Willow Oaks, I wasn't met with open hearts. I was met with a private auction sign standing defiantly in the center of the room. They intended to auction off my childhood home, a property where I legally hold 50% ownership, just to bail out my brother who is drowning in gambling debt. Before I could even process this blatant treachery, my father stepped forward, his hand gripping my shoulder like a steel vise. He leaned into my ear, his voice a cold, bone-chilling rasp. "Keep your mouth shut and smile. Tonight you will sign this confirmation of sale. This house is going to disappear to save your brother whether you like it or not. Don't make me use force in front of our distinguished guests." I looked at the sea of strangers casually appraising my every memory, then back at the father who saw me as nothing more than a bargaining chip. A surge of fury ignited within me, incinerating the last shred of filial piety I had left. It turns out, my silence and trust all these years were the very weapons they used to stab me in the heart. I let out a faint smile, a smile that signaled the beginning of a calculated reckoning they would never see coming. This blatant betrayal is only the beginning of a horrific identity theft plot my parents orchestrated to ruin me. Can I flip the script when the auction clock is ticking down by the hour? Subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell now to follow my journey as I make these greedy predators pay dearly for every cent they tried to steal from my future. The relentless hum of Chicago's evening traffic usually acted as a soothing backdrop to my structured life. But that Tuesday night, a single phone call shattered the peace of my high-rise apartment. I was sitting at my mahogany desk finalizing a multi-million-dollar property appraisal when the screen of my phone lit up with a contact name I hadn't seen in months: Josie Sterling. My mother rarely called unless there was a social appearance to maintain, but the moment I pressed the receiver to my ear, the sound of her jagged, hysterical breathing told me this was different. "Josie. Oh, Josie, thank God you picked up." She wailed, her voice trembling with a fragility I had never heard before. "It's your father. It's Howard. He collapsed during dinner. The doctors at the Savannah Heart Center are saying it's a critical blockage. He needs emergency bypass surgery immediately or we're going to lose him." My heart plummeted into my stomach. My father, Howard Sterling, was a man who seemed carved from granite, a patriarch who held the Sterling legacy together with an iron grip. Hearing him described as fragile felt like a tectonic shift in my reality. "Mom, breathe. Tell me exactly what the surgeon said." I urged, already pulling my laptop closer to check the earliest flights to Georgia. "They won't even prep him for the theater until we prove we can cover the out-of-pocket expenses and the post-operative care." Peggy sobbed, her words punctuated by sharp gasps for air. "The family estate accounts are tied up in probate from your grandfather's passing, and Tristan, well, you know your brother, he's been so distraught he can't handle the paperwork. Josie, we need the trust's liquidity unlocked. Your signature as the co-executor is the only thing that can save him. Please come home. Don't let him die thinking his only daughter didn't care." The guilt hit me like a physical blow. I spent the next 48 hours in a frantic blur. I didn't waste time shopping for the usual luxury gifts or French wines that my parents expected as a homecoming tax. Instead, I cleared my personal savings account, the rainy day fund I had meticulously built over 6 years in the corporate trenches of Chicago. I packed my leather briefcase not with vanity items but with the comprehensive architectural restoration plans I had secretly commissioned for Willow Oaks. I intended to show my father that I was ready to use my own wealth to preserve our ancestral home, so he would never have to worry about the estate's crumbling finances again. I was coming back not just as a daughter, but as a savior. The flight to Savannah was a journey through a tunnel of anxiety. I stared out the window at the shifting clouds, clutching the folder containing my $300,000 liquidity statement money I was prepared to surrender the moment I stepped off the plane. I kept picturing Howard in a sterile hospital bed, hooked up to machines fighting for his breath. I arrived at the gates of the Sterling Manor late in the evening, my heels clicking urgently against the cobblestones. But as I pushed open the heavy oak doors, the scent that greeted me wasn't the sterile sting of antiseptic or the heaviness of grief. It was the expensive aroma of aged bourbon and roasting prime rib. The house was ablaze with warm, golden light. There were no ambulances, no hushed whispers of tragedy, only the distant rhythmic clinking of crystal glasses and the booming, healthy laughter of my father echoing from the ballroom. I stood in the foyer, my hand still trembling on the handle of my briefcase, as the chilling realization began to settle into my bones. The emergency surgery wasn't for a failing heart. It was a surgical strike on my bank account to fund a lie. The opulent ballroom felt like a gilded cage, the air thick with the suffocating scent of expensive lilies and betrayal. I couldn't stand another second of my father's fake joviality or my mother's rehearsed smiles. Needing air, I slipped through the French doors, letting the humidity of the Georgia night cling to my skin like a second layer of grief. I wandered toward the shadow of the centuries-old oak trees that lined the stone patio, but the sound of hushed, aggressive voices from behind the rose trellises brought me to a sudden halt. "You said the girl was the final piece, Tristan. My patience has a price, and it's skyrocketing by the minute," a voice hissed. It was low, sharp, and carried the unmistakable chill of authority. I recognized it immediately as Alistair Vance. "I'm doing everything I can, Alistair. She's here, isn't she?" My brother Tristan Sterling sounded desperate, his usual cocky bravado replaced by a pathetic whining edge. "My parents have been grooming her for weeks. She's emotional, she's soft for family. She'll sign that concurrence of sale tonight and you'll get your pound of flesh." I pressed my back against the rough bark of an oak tree, my breath hitching in my throat. I watched through the leaves as Alistair stepped into a sliver of moonlight. He wasn't just a real estate developer looking for a trophy property. The way he gripped Tristan's lapel suggested a much darker connection. "Let's be clear about your situation." Alistair continued, his eyes devoid of any human warmth. "You didn't just lose a few hands at the underground tables in Atlanta. You burned through a credit line that wasn't yours to spend. Those private casinos don't take apologies as currency. I bought your debt because I wanted this manor, but if that signature doesn't hit the parchment by midnight, I'll stop being your benefactor and start being your debt collector. And trust me, Tristan, you can't afford the interest I charge on failure." Tristan's face was ashen, his hands shaking as he tried to adjust his silk tie. "The auction is a formality to satisfy the board, you know that. Once Josie signs, the ownership transfer is seamless. Just give me 2 more hours. I'll make sure she's cornered." The sheer scale of the deception made my head spin. My brother hadn't just made a mistake. He had sold my inheritance, my memories, and my future to settle his filth in the shadows of Atlanta's gambling dens. And my parents weren't victims of his greed. They were his accomplices, willing to sacrifice their only daughter to keep their precious son out of a shallow grave. Alistair Vance wasn't an investor. He was a predator who had smelled the blood of a dying legacy and moved in for the kill. As Alistair turned on his heel and disappeared back toward the lights of the ballroom, Tristan slumped against a stone pillar, buried his face in his hands, and let out a shaky, jagged breath. I stood in the darkness, a ghost in my own home, watching the man I once shared a childhood with plot my financial ruin. The pity I expected to feel never came. Instead, a cold, crystalline clarity settled over me. They thought I was the soft one, the easy mark who would cave under the weight of Sterling tradition. They had no idea that I had spent the last decade in the cutthroat boardrooms of Chicago, learning exactly how to skin sharks alive. The darkness surrounding the study ahead was no colder than the truth I was about to uncover in my father's computer. The heavy silence of Willow Oaks after midnight was suffocating, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock that sounded like a countdown to my own ruin. I navigated the darkened corridor with the precision of a ghost, my bare feet silent against the polished oak floors until I reached the heavy carved doors of my grandfather's old study. This room had always been a sanctuary of tradition, smelling of leather-bound books and pipe tobacco, but tonight it felt like the scene of a silent crime. I sat behind the massive mahogany desk, the very seat where Howard Sterling had spent decades maintaining the illusion of our family's untarnished dignity, and felt a cold shiver of anticipation. My hands were steady as I bypassed the rudimentary security on the family's workstation. As a senior financial analyst in Chicago, I had spent years untangling complex corporate frauds, yet I never imagined the most devastating audit of my career would take place in my own home. I bypassed the surface-level household accounts and dived straight into the encrypted digital vault where the property titles were stored. When the first document flickered onto the screen, the breath left my lungs in a sharp, painful hiss. It was a second mortgage application for Willow Oaks filed barely 6 months ago, a lien for $300,000. I leaned closer, my eyes burning in the blue light of the monitor as I scrolled to the bottom of the legal filing. There it was, my own digital signature, perfectly rendered and time-stamped. But I had been in Illinois on that date, closing a deal that required my physical presence. My father hadn't just asked for my help. He had committed identity theft using a legacy software key I had left in his care years ago to forge my consent. He had shackled me to a debt I never agreed to, using my pristine credit score as collateral for his desperation. Driven by a sickening hunch, I began tracing the outflow of funds from that mortgage. The money hadn't gone toward the crumbling foundation of the manor or the medical emergencies my mother had sobbed about. Instead, the ledger revealed a series of rapid-fire wire transfers to a private offshore account. From there, the trail led directly to a high-stakes digital wallet belonging to Tristan Sterling. Every cent of that $300,000, the entirety of the life savings I had diligently sent home over the past 6 years for the Preservation Fund, had been systematically drained. It wasn't used for mahogany repairs or garden restoration. It had been laundered through layers of accounts to fuel Tristan's addiction in the shadows of the Atlanta gambling circuit. The magnitude of the betrayal settled in my stomach like lead. For 6 years, I had worked 80-hour weeks, skipped vacations, and lived frugally in a crowded city, so I could provide a safety net for my parents and the house that held our history. I thought I was being the responsible pillar of the family, but in reality, I was merely an unpaid bank for a sociopathic brother and a father who viewed me as a disposable asset. I wasn't just losing my inheritance, I was legally liable for a massive fraudulent loan. If the auction failed tonight, the bank would come for my assets in Chicago, my career would be incinerated by the scandal, and Howard would likely watch it happen from the comfort of his leather armchair. A crystalline, diamond-hard rage began to replace the initial shock. They hadn't just stolen my money, they had attempted to steal my entire future to pay for Tristan's sins. But as I stared at the forged signature on the screen, I realized my father had made one fatal error. He forgot that I didn't just understand numbers, I knew how to make them scream. But as painful as this financial autopsy was, the cruelty contained within my mother's private devices was about to prove that my value to this family was even lower than I feared. Leaving the cold shadows of the study, I moved toward the guest wing, my mind still reeling from the financial theft I had just uncovered. But as I passed the mahogany console table in the grand corridor, a faint rhythmic pulsing of light caught my eye. There, forgotten amidst a vase of wilting lilies, lay an iPad. I recognized the silk-embroidered cover immediately. It belonged to my mother, Peggy Sterling. She was notorious for her digital carelessness, often leaving her devices unlocked and humming with activity. I reached out my fingers trembling as I swiped the screen. It didn't ask for a passcode. It opened directly to an active messaging thread titled Sterling Blood, a private group consisting only of my mother, my father, and my brother. The messages were recent time-stamped during the very hour I was supposed to be reconnecting with the family over dinner. I leaned against the cold marble wall, scrolling through a conversation that felt like a slow-acting poison. Alistair Vance is losing patience, my father Howard Sterling had messaged. We need Josie to sign the confirmation of sale by 10 a.m. Once that's done, the title transfer is immediate. I've already contacted the offshore bank in the Caymans. The liquid assets from the auction will be wired directly there, bypassing the domestic audit. My mother's reply followed, decorated with heart emojis that felt like a cruel mockery. Poor Josie. She really believes we're saving the house for her. I almost felt bad when she showed me those restoration plans. But Howard, are we sure the identity theft trail is buried? If the bank looks too closely at the forged digital signature, she could be flagged before we even leave the country. The response from my brother Tristan Sterling made the blood in my veins turn to ice. Don't worry, Mom. The way Dad structured the loan, the secondary liability falls entirely on the primary executor of the trust, which is Josie. Once the house is sold and the mortgage is settled with the auction proceeds, there will still be a significant deficiency balance from the interest penalties. By the time the creditors realize the funds have vanished into our offshore accounts, we'll be in Europe. Josie has the corporate salary and the assets in Chicago. They'll go after her, not us. She's the perfect fall guy. She's always been the responsible one. My father added, his words appearing on the screen with a chilling finality. She can handle the legal fallout. It's a small price for her to pay to ensure Tristan has a fresh start. We've sacrificed enough for this family. It's time she did the same. I stared at the screen until the words blurred into a jagged mess of blue and white. They weren't just selling a house. They were selling me. They had calculated my worth down to my credit score and my ability to survive a federal fraud investigation. My mother's tears about a failing heart, my father's talk of legacy, and my brother's desperate pleas. It was all a synchronized performance designed to keep me distracted while they fitted the noose around my neck. I wasn't their daughter. I was their exit strategy. The silence of the hallway was broken only by the distant, muffled sound of Alistair Vance's laughter from the terrace. They thought they had trapped me in a corner of my own making, but they had forgotten the most basic rule of the game they were playing. When you strip someone of everything they love and every shred of loyalty they possess, you don't leave them with nothing. You leave them with a terrifying, limitless freedom. My heart had gone completely numb, the warmth of filial love replaced by the diamond-hard edge of a reckoning that would be as clinical as it was devastating. The humid air of Savannah usually felt like a warm embrace, but at 4 o'clock in the morning on the balcony of Willow Oaks, it felt as sharp and unforgiving as a razor. I stood wrapped in a silk robe, staring out at the Spanish moss draped over the ancient oaks, watching the distant rhythmic strobing of the Atlantic coast. My hands, which had been trembling just an hour ago, were now as steady as a surgeon's. I reached for my encrypted phone and dialed a number I had kept in my emergency contacts since my first day at the firm in Chicago. Sloan, it's Josie Sterling. I need you to trigger the nuclear option on the Savannah estate. Now. Nit. Marcus Sloan, my personal attorney and a specialist in high-stakes white-collar fraud, didn't ask questions about the hour. He simply listened as I uploaded the digital forensic files I had extracted from my father's study and the incriminating screenshots from my mother's iPad. The digital signature on that second mortgage is a pixel-perfect forgery of my old legacy key. I said, my voice cutting through the pre-dawn silence. And I've just verified through the Sterling Blood messaging logs that the intent was to liquidate the asset and launder the proceeds to an offshore account in the Caymans. They're planning to leave me with the deficiency balance and the criminal liability. I want an immediate injunction on the auction scheduled for 10 o'clock. I see it, Josie. Sloane's voice was crisp, professional, and entirely devoid of pity. Under Georgia law, since you hold the title as a joint tenant with rights of survivorship, any lien or sale entered into without your verified non-fraudulent consent is null and void. I'm drafting the emergency stay of execution for the sale right now. I'm also filing a formal affidavit of identity theft with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation and the Federal Trade Commission. By the time the first bidder raises a paddle, the bank's legal department will be breathing down your father's neck. Do more than that. I added, my gaze fixed on the flickering lights of the manor's gatehouse. I want a freeze on all domestic Sterling Trust accounts. If they try to move even $1 of the preservation fund I've been contributing to, I want the authorities notified of suspected money laundering. I am no longer a benefactor. I am a whistleblower. Consider it done, Sloane replied. I'll have the sheriff's department serve the papers at the start of the gala. You're sure about this? There's no going back once I hit send. They burned the bridge while I was still standing on it. Marcus, I'm just making sure they can't swim. I ended the call and spent the next hour meticulously forwarding the evidence to the fraud department of the mortgage lender and the Savannah office of the clerk of Superior Court. With a few keystrokes, I revoked the power of attorney I had granted my father years ago and moved my personal assets into a protected vault that even the Sterling Estates lawyers couldn't touch. I was systematically dismantling the trap they had built for me, turning their own greed into the shackles that would bind them. The weight of 28 years of loyalty and daughterly devotion was finally lifted, replaced by the cold, exhilarating precision of a financial executioner. I watched the sky begin to turn a bruised, pale purple in the east. They thought they were the masters of this house, but they had forgotten that the foundations weren't built on blood. They were built on the very laws they had so arrogantly discarded. As the first light of dawn touched the spires of Willow Oaks, everything had changed completely. The morning sun streamed through the stained glass windows of Willow Oaks, casting long, fractured shadows across the marble floor of the grand foyer. It was 10 o'clock. Alistair Vance sat at the antique signing table, his gold fountain pen poised over the final transfer deed. My father, Howard Sterling, was standing beside him, his face radiating a triumphant glow that I knew was fueled by the anticipation of the wire transfer hitting his offshore account. My mother, Peggy Sterling, and my brother, Tristan Sterling, stood behind them like a royal court, already whispering about which European city they would visit first. Just your signature here. Howard and Willow Oaks belongs to the Vance Group. Alistair said, his voice smooth and predatory. Wait. The single word cut through the air like a gunshot. I stepped into the foyer from the back terrace, accompanied by Marcus Sloane and 2 uniformed officers from the Savannah Police Department. The celebratory atmosphere vanished instantly, replaced by a thick, suffocating tension. Josie, what is the meaning of this interruption? Howard barked, his face reddening as he tried to maintain his composure. We are in the middle of a private transaction. Go back to your room. There is no transaction, Howard. I replied, refusing to call him father for the first time in my life. I nodded toward Marcus, who stepped forward and placed a thick stack of legal documents on the table right on top of the unsigned deed. Mr. Vance, I am Marcus Sloane, legal counsel for Ms. Josie Sterling, my attorney announced. We have served an emergency stay of execution on this sale. My client is a 50% title holder of this estate under a joint tenancy agreement. Furthermore, we have provided the district attorney with forensic evidence proving that the digital signature used to authorize the secondary mortgage and this pending sale was a fraudulent forgery. This house is under a legal freeze, and this auction is officially terminated. Alistair Vance slowly capped his pen, his eyes narrowing as he looked at Tristan, then at Howard. You told me the girl was handled. You told me the consent was verified. It's a misunderstanding. Peggy stammered, her face turning a sickly shade of gray. Josie, darling, don't do this. We're doing this for the family. For Tristan. No, mother. You did this for a lie. I said, my voice rising with a strength that surprised even me. I saw the messages. I saw the offshore account numbers. You weren't saving the house. You were selling my life to pay for Tristan's sins, and then running away to leave me with the wreckage. You stole $300,000 of my savings money I earned through years of sacrifice, and you rewarded my loyalty with identity theft. As the officers moved toward Howard and Tristan to present the warrants for questioning regarding financial fraud and identity theft, the reality of their failure finally shattered their masks. Tristan began to sob, a pathetic sound that echoed in the vast hall, while Howard stood frozen, his legacy crumbling at his feet. You can't do this, Howard hissed as the officers led him toward the door. You're a Sterling. You'll be penniless without this house. I am a Sterling, but I am not a victim, I stated firmly. And you're wrong about the house. Effective immediately, I have signed my 50% interest over to the National Trust for Historic Preservation. I have also filed a petition to void your remaining interest due to the fraudulent liens you placed on the property. Willow Oaks will never be a casino fund, and it will never be a Sterling private playground again. It will be a museum protected by federal law, where you can never set foot again. I stood on the front portico as the police cruisers pulled away, the sirens fading into the humid Savannah morning. The silence that followed was the first true peace I had felt in weeks. I looked at the grand oak trees, their branches heavy with moss and history, and I realized that I hadn't just saved a building, I had saved myself. I had spent my life trying to buy their love with my achievements and my money, only to realize that true self-worth cannot be forged or auctioned. I took a deep breath of the salt-tinged air, adjusted my coat, and walked toward my car. Family might be blood, but it is not a blank check for ingratitude. I was leaving Savannah behind, but I was taking my future back with me, untarnished, independent, and finally my own.